Luka M vanished long before his body washed ashore on the Bay of Kotor. Just another ghost in a world built on loyalty, blood, and cocaine. Behind him stood the men who shaped Europe's darkest empire. Ex-soldiers turned smugglers, corrupt officials turned millionaires, and silent businessmen who ruled from the shadows. Together, they built a network so vast and invisible that it changed the flow of Europe's cocaine trade forever. This is the untold story of how the Western Balkans, Europe's forgotten corner, became the beating heart of a hidden cocaine empire. The Adriatic coast stretched for miles, a glittering line of blue and gold, where the sea met the land. Tourists who visited this region, especially the tiny ports of Montenegro, Albania, and Croatia, saw only beauty. The air smelled of salt and grilled fish, boats drifted lazily on the waves, and families gathered near harbors, watching the sunset melt into the horizon. It looked like peace, but beneath that calm surface, something dark was moving, unseen yet powerful enough to shape the underworld of Europe. The coastline was perfect for hiding things. Between stretches of crowded beaches were hidden coves, narrow inlets, and abandoned warehouses, left from the days when Yugoslavia was still one nation. Local fishermen knew every rock and current, every shadow in the water. It was this deep local knowledge that outsiders began to exploit. Long before anyone noticed, small cargo boats from South America started arriving under the cover of night. They carried no flags and used no lights. By dawn they were gone, leaving behind crates that never appeared on any customs record. The first few shipments were small, just enough to test the route. The smugglers discovered how easy it was slipped through unnoticed. The Balkan countries had complex coastlines and weak maritime enforcement, especially during winter, when storms kept most patrols at bay. Corruption made things even easier. A few €1,000 could make an entire night's inspection disappear. Slowly the operation grew bolder. What began as small drops turned into large-scale deliveries hidden inside legitimate fishing vessels. The same harbors that once exported olive oil and wine now became silent gateways for cocaine. The people living along the coast had their suspicions, but few spoke out. Some saw new money flowing into their villages, luxury cars, renovated houses, and flashy bars that never seemed to close. Young men who once struggled to find work suddenly owned boats and businesses. They claimed success came from shipping work, and no one asked too many questions. In communities where jobs were scarce and survival was tough, silence became a form of protection. By 2010, the Western Balkans had quietly transformed into one of the most efficient smuggling corridors in Europe. Authorities in other countries were confused by the sudden rise of cocaine flooding into European cities, but they couldn't trace its source. The shipments didn't come through well-known ports like Rotterdam or Antwerp. They slipped in through smaller, forgotten docks that no one watched. The cocaine was then hidden in trucks, trains, and ferries, spreading across the continent before anyone could react. Behind it all was a web of people who blended perfectly with their surroundings. Fishermen, port workers, and local businessmen who appeared ordinary by day. Yet at night, they operated with precision and discipline. Radios crackled in secret codes, boats moved in synchronized patterns, and transactions were handled in total silence. The empire's foundations were being built in plain sight, invisible to outsiders but thriving under the watchful eyes of those who benefited from it. From the outside, the Adriatic still shimmered like a paradise, but deep within its calm waters lay the roots of Europe's hidden cocaine empire, a network that would soon rise from these quiet shores and reshape the criminal landscape of the continent. In 2015, something unusual began to appear on the monitors of European maritime surveillance teams. Cargo ships traveling from South America to Italy or Spain would suddenly vanish from radar near the Montenegrin coast. Their GPS signals would go silent for several hours, as if swallowed by the sea, before reappearing further along the route, perfectly on schedule but oddly lighter in the water. At first it seemed like a technical glitch, but the pattern became too regular to ignore. The disappearances always occurred in the same narrow stretch of water, an area notorious for unpredictable weather and poor visibility. What no one realized at the time was that this was the precise point where cocaine was being unloaded, transferred to smaller local boats, and carried into Europe through invisible channels. The operation was designed with remarkable precision. The big cargo ships carried legitimate goods, fruit, timber, and minerals, but hidden deep inside were sealed containers filled with cocaine bricks packed in waterproof layers. As the ships neared the Balkan coast, their crew received coded messages via satellite phones. Within minutes, the ships would kill their transponders, cutting off all tracking systems. Under the cover of darkness, smaller speedboats approached from hidden coves, guided only by faint flashes of light reflected off the waves. Within an hour, the cargo had changed hands. The drugs disappeared into fishing vessels that looked perfectly ordinary to anyone passing by. When the larger ships resumed their journey and their signals reappeared, everything looked normal on paper. Their manifests were clean, their cargo intact, and their routes consistent. Meanwhile, the cocaine was already being offloaded in isolated harbors along the Montenegrin and Albanian coasts. From there, it was hidden inside trucks or shipping containers heading north toward Italy, Austria, and Germany. Every move was rehearsed, every participant paid to stay silent. The plan was so efficient that for years, no one outside the network even suspected what was happening. Occasionally, small traces of the operation leaked into public view. A customs officer might find a container with strange markings, or a fisherman might report unusual boat activity at night. But nothing concrete ever surfaced. Those who asked too many questions often transferred to new posts, or simply vanished from their jobs. Local police forces lacked the equipment and funding to patrol the endless coastlines effectively. Many officers quietly accepted that the problem was beyond their control. The mystery deepened when European investigators began linking the timing of these signal disappearances to the arrival of cocaine shipments in major European cities. It was as if a ghost fleet was feeding the continent's drug demand from a hidden pipeline no one could trace. The Western Balkans had unknowingly become the perfect smuggling hub, a place where geography, corruption, and poverty created the ideal environment for organized crime. As the years passed, the network grew bolder. New captains joined the trade, drawn by the promise of easy wealth. Entire villages along the coast began to depend on this invisible economy. Families who once survived on fishing now relied on smuggling money, their livelihoods tied to the movement of illegal cargo. And while the world looked elsewhere, the disappearing ships continued to come and go, moving silently through the night, carrying the seeds of an empire that was only just beginning to rise. In the shadows of the Adriatic coast, where loyalty could mean survival and betrayal brought sudden death, a new order began to take shape. It was not a single cartel or organization, but a brotherhood of men bound by shared history, war, and ambition. They called themselves nothing officially, but others would later name them the Brotherhood of Shadows. These men were veterans of the Balkan Wars, soldiers who had seen destruction, chaos, and hunger. When peace arrived, it brought no stability, only unemployment and broken promises. Their weapons were taken away, but their skills remained. They understood logistics, secrecy, and discipline. And soon they found a new battlefield, the world of organized crime. At first, the Brotherhood operated quietly, using the chaos of post-war reconstruction to build influence. Many had family members working in customs, police, or shipping companies, and they used these connections to open doors that others couldn't. Their goal wasn't to dominate through violence, but through control. Each man took responsibility for a specific part of the operation. One controlled the docks, another the truck routes, another the paperwork that made everything appear legitimate. This system gave them flexibility and protection. No one person knew the entire structure, making it nearly impossible for authorities to dismantle. Their methods were built on trust, not ideology. They had no political ambitions, no slogans, and no flags. Only profit and silence. Meetings were rare, communication was limited to coded messages, and orders moved like whispers across borders. The men of the Brotherhood treated their criminal work as a business, one that demanded precision and patience. Violence was used only as a last resort, but when it came, it was fast, decisive, and ruthless. The message was always clear: betrayal would be punished without hesitation. By 2013, the Brotherhood's influence had spread beyond the Balkans. They had partners in Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands, each connected through layers of intermediaries. Their operations stretched from tiny marinas in Montenegro to luxury hotels in Marbella and Vienna. Money flowed through offshore companies registered under fake names, disguised as construction or import-export businesses. Their power was invisible to the public, yet it touched every corner of the European cocaine trade. What made them truly dangerous was their adaptability. They didn't rely on one route or one supplier. When ports tightened security, they shifted to land routes through Serbia and Bosnia. When customs increased inspections, they used air cargo or courier services with falsified paperwork. Every problem became an opportunity to evolve. They operated like ghosts, always moving, always changing, leaving no trace behind. In local towns, their presence was felt but rarely seen. They funded small businesses, paid for public events, gave loans to families in need. To many, they appeared as benefactors, the only ones willing to help when the government failed. This created a silent loyalty that no police force could break. People protected them, not out of fear but out of gratitude. The Brotherhood's strength came from the very soil of the Balkans, its resilience, its secrecy, and its centuries-old code of honor. From the outside, they seemed like ordinary men, mechanics, shop owners, fishermen, but together they formed the spine of a criminal empire that no one could see and no one could easily stop. Their rise had only just begun, and the world would soon learn how deep their influence truly ran. When the Brotherhood sought to expand beyond the Balkans, they knew they needed a link inside Western Europe, someone smart enough to blend into the legal world, but ruthless enough to survive its criminal side. That connection came in the form of Luka, a young smuggler from Montenegro, who had grown up near the docks of Kotor. He started as a small-time hustler, running cigarettes and counterfeit goods, but his charm and boldness caught the attention of the older men who quietly ran the trade. Unlike most of them, Luka spoke Spanish, Italian, and English fluently. He could move through different cultures without raising suspicion, and he had an instinct for business. The Brotherhood saw in him a bridge between two worlds, the rough edges of the Adriatic underworld and the polished criminal networks of Spain. In 2014, Luka settled in Valencia under a false identity, posing as an importer of frozen fruit. His legitimate company provided the perfect cover for what would soon become one of Europe's most efficient cocaine pipelines. The Brotherhood supplied the logistics, and Luka managed the connections. Using his charm, he built relationships inside the Port Authority, paying off dock workers and customs officers to ignore certain containers or mark them as cleared before inspection. The cocaine arrived hidden in sealed boxes of fruit pulp and frozen berries, carefully packed so that sniffer dogs could not detect it. Within months, Luka's shipments began to flow smoothly through the port. From Valencia, the drugs were moved to warehouses in Barcelona and Marseille, then distributed to cities across Europe: Paris, London, Amsterdam, and Berlin. Every week, millions of euros were made, and the money returned to the Balkans disguised as investments in tourism and construction. Apartment complexes, restaurants, and marinas began to appear along the coast, all funded by profits from this growing empire. Locals whispered about sudden wealth, but no one could trace where it came from. Luka's success made him a legend among smugglers. He dressed in expensive suits, drove luxury cars, and attended business conferences to maintain his public image. To the outside world, he looked like a young entrepreneur thriving in the European market, but behind the scenes he managed a criminal network that connected the jungles of Colombia to the streets of Europe. The Colombian cartels trusted him because he delivered results without noise or bloodshed. The Brotherhood trusted him because he brought money and respect. For a time, Luka was untouchable. But power attracts enemies. Rival groups within the Balkans began to suspect that Luka was keeping a larger share of the profits for himself. Small conflicts emerged, missing shipments, false reports, and secret alliances forming behind closed doors. Luka ignored the signs, believing he was too valuable to be replaced. Yet the cracks in the empire were already forming. By late 2017, the network Luka had built was moving nearly 40% of Europe's cocaine supply. He had achieved everything he dreamed of, but his success had also drawn attention from both law enforcement and dangerous men within his own circle. The Spanish connection had made the Brotherhood rich, but it also made them vulnerable, and soon the empire that Luka helped create would turn against him in the most brutal way imaginable. The morning the body washed ashore near the Bay of Kotor was unusually calm. The sea was still, sky pale and clear, and the fishermen who found it thought at first it was just another drowned sailor. But when they pulled it from the water, they saw the neat, deliberate gunshots, 2 to the chest, 1 to the shoulder. The man was Luka M, the architect of the Brotherhood's Spanish connection and the mastermind behind their European expansion. His death sent shockwaves through the entire criminal underworld. For years, Luka had been untouchable. Now his body floating in the bay was a message, though no one could say for sure who sent it. Within days, rumors spread across Montenegro, Serbia, and Spain. Some said Luka had been killed for stealing from the profits. Others believed he was eliminated by rivals within his own organization, perhaps by men who once called him brother. What was certain was that his murder shattered the fragile unity that had held the Brotherhood together. The group that had once operated like a single organism split into 2 bitter factions, the Kavač clan and the Škaljari clan, each claiming to be the rightful heir to Luka's empire. The feud began quietly, with whispers and accusations, but it didn't stay that way for long. One by one, men began to disappear. Car bombs exploded in coastal towns once considered safe. In cities across Europe from Belgrade to Barcelona, gunmen carried out public executions in broad daylight. Cafes, parking lots, and luxury hotels became scenes of bloodshed. Local police forces were overwhelmed, struggling to contain a war that seemed to have no clear borders or rules. The violence didn't just destroy lives, it infected entire communities. Families fled, and businesses closed. The same towns that had prospered from smuggling money now lived under the constant shadow of fear. Behind the chaos, a deeper struggle for control was unfolding. Both clans wanted access to the same routes Luka had created: the ports, the warehouses, and the contacts with South American suppliers. Each side believed the other had betrayed them. The killings were not random, they were strategic, targeting those who controlled key parts of the smuggling infrastructure. Within 2 years, more than 50 men linked to the war had been murdered across Europe. The police launched massive investigations, but fear and corruption slowed every effort. Witnesses refused to speak, and evidence disappeared. Even when arrests were made, trials collapsed due to intimidation or lack of cooperation. Law enforcement agencies across Europe began referring to the conflict as the Invisible War, a hidden battle fought not for ideology but for money and power. Luka's murder had done more than end one man's life. It had unleashed a chain reaction that changed the face of organized crime in Europe. The Brotherhood no longer existed as a unified force. In its place stood 2 violent empires locked in a deadly cycle of revenge. Yet, as brutal as the war became, both sides continued to move cocaine across the continent using the same secret routes Luka had built. Even in death, his system lived on, feeding the trade that made the Western Balkans both feared and untouchable. While gunfire echoed through the streets of Kotor and revenge killings spread across Europe, the true architects of the empire remained hidden. They were the unseen hands guiding the chaos, men who had learned long ago that power was safer when invisible. These were not the street enforcers or the smugglers on the boats. They were businessmen, financiers, and former intelligence officers who had turned their expertise into control. They operated from the shadows, watching the war between the clans unfold like a distraction that kept police and the public occupied. Beneath the noise, their empire continued to grow quietly, untouched and expanding deeper into the heart of Europe. Their operations became known among investigators as the Hidden Kingdom. It had no borders, no headquarters, and no official leader. Instead, it functioned through layers of offshore companies, coded communications, and trusted intermediaries. The men behind it lived far from the violence, in penthouses, in Vienna, Zurich, and Dubai, where they laundered millions through real estate, art, and cryptocurrency. From their secure locations, they directed every movement, the timing of shipments, the distribution networks, the financial channels that turned cocaine into clean profit. They never touched the drugs themselves, yet they controlled every gram that moved across the continent. What made this hidden network so powerful was its use of technology and corruption. The leaders understood that loyalty could be bought more easily than enforced. Customs officers, shipping agents, and even low-level politicians were paid monthly gifts to look the other way. When money wasn't enough, blackmail ensured compliance. Some officials found compromising photos or videos leaked online after refusing cooperation. Others simply disappeared. In the Balkans, silence had always been a form of survival, and the Hidden Kingdom turned that silence into its greatest weapon. To move cocaine efficiently, they used innovations that seemed almost cinematic. Submarines built in Colombia were equipped with GPS trackers and remote systems, allowing them to cross the Atlantic autonomously. The cocaine was packed in specialized containers that released no scent and were disguised as coffee, cocoa, or industrial chemicals. Corrupt airline workers smuggled smaller amounts inside diplomatic cargo or private jets. Every link in the chain was ensured. If one shipment was lost, 10 more would succeed. Meanwhile, public attention remained fixed on the gang war between the Kavač and Škaljari clans. Each new killing filled newspapers, distracting everyone from the deeper truth that the real power no longer rested in Montenegro or Serbia, but in the boardrooms of Europe's financial capitals. The Hidden Kingdom had evolved beyond traditional organized crime. It operated like a multinational corporation, where profit reports replaced loyalty oaths and bribes replaced. For investigators, the challenge was immense. Every time a lead surfaced, it dissolved into layers of fake identities, encrypted servers, and ghost companies. Witnesses feared for their lives, and digital evidence vanished faster than it could be traced. The deeper authorities dug, the more the truth seemed to slip away. To them it felt as if they were chasing shadows cast by men who no longer existed in any legal sense. And as Europe tried to understand the scale of what it was facing, the Hidden Kingdom continued to thrive in silence, its leaders untouched, its money clean, and its empire stronger than ever. In 2022, a quiet revolution began inside Europe's law enforcement networks. For years, investigators had been chasing ghosts, names that changed, phone numbers that vanished, and bank accounts that led to nothing. The Hidden Kingdom seemed untouchable, but then, by chance and persistence, a breakthrough came. French and Dutch authorities had secretly infiltrated an encrypted communication platform used by organized crime groups worldwide. The network, known as Sky ECC, contained millions of messages between traffickers, smugglers, and their financial backers. Among them were the encrypted conversations of the Balkan network, the very men who believed their system was unbreakable. When the first decoded messages appeared on investigator screens, disbelief turned into shock. Every detail of the cocaine empire lay exposed: routes, payments, locations, and even photographs of drug shipments being loaded. It was like opening a secret diary of Europe's underworld. Within weeks, law enforcement agencies from 15 countries launched coordinated raids. Warehouses in Spain, Italy, and Belgium were stormed at dawn. Cargo containers filled with coffee beans were seized, revealing tons of cocaine carefully hidden inside. In Montenegro and Serbia, police arrested men who had long been rumored to control the ports, men once believed untouchable. The raids revealed the staggering scale of the operation. Cocaine worth billions had been smuggled using legitimate trade routes, its profits flowing into offshore accounts in Cyprus, Panama, and the United Arab Emirates. But the biggest shock came when investigators uncovered a trail of corruption leading straight into the heart of government institutions. Among the encrypted messages were conversations between traffickers and senior customs officials, police commanders and even political advisors. They had been paid to protect shipments, destroy evidence, and warn smugglers about upcoming inspections. The illusion of law and order had been quietly compromised for years. In some cities, the arrests were celebrated as a major victory. News headlines called it the fall of the untouchables. Images of handcuffed men in designer suits filled television screens. Yet behind the scenes, investigators knew it was only a partial victory. Many of the real decision-makers, the financiers and coordinators living abroad, had already moved their operations to new jurisdictions. Their money was safe, hidden in complex digital transactions that crossed borders faster than any investigation could follow. Still, for a moment, it seemed the tide was turning. Tons of cocaine were confiscated, hundreds of suspects detained, and for the first time the Balkan Cartel's inner structure had been mapped out in detail. The European Union formed a special task force dedicated to dismantling what remained of the network, but as months passed, the investigation began to stall. Witnesses recanted statements, servers went offline, and court cases dragged into silence. In some countries, arrested officials were quietly released, their charges reduced or dismissed. The hidden kingdom had been wounded, but it wasn't dead. Like a hydra, every time one head was cut off, two more appeared. The men behind the empire had spent decades mastering the art of survival. They knew how to disappear, how to wait, and how to rebuild. And as law enforcement celebrated its victory, deep in the shadows of Europe, the remaining leaders were already laying the foundations for their next move. Even after the massive arrests of 2022, the cocaine trade through the Western Balkans refused to die. The network had been fractured, but its spirit remained alive in the younger generation. Men who had grown up watching the old clans rule the coastline with wealth and fear. They had seen the power, the cars, the houses, and the respect. And though many of their mentors were dead or imprisoned, the lesson they had learned was clear. There would always be demand, and someone would always step in to supply it. What began as a shadow of the old brotherhood soon evolved into a new kind of empire. Smaller, faster, and far more adaptable to the digital world. These new traffickers no longer relied on fishing boats or hidden coves. They worked with encrypted networks, cryptocurrency wallets, and global shipping logistics. They used drones to scout coastlines and satellite maps to plan drops. The trade had become modern, sophisticated, and almost invisible. The cocaine moved in smaller, smarter shipments, hidden inside car parts, industrial machinery, and even humanitarian aid containers. The Western Balkans remained the perfect gateway, a crossroads between East and West, where borders were porous and money could vanish overnight. Law enforcement agencies continued to make arrests, but it was like trying to hold water in their hands. Every time one group was caught, another emerged under a different name, using new technology and cleaner methods. The old clans had relied on loyalty and blood. The new ones relied on data and encryption. Yet beneath the surface, the same principles remained: power, silence, and survival. From small coastal towns to the luxurious streets of Zurich and Dubai, the flow of cocaine continued, its profits feeding the same cycle of corruption that had always protected it. Ordinary people rarely saw the faces behind it anymore. The violence that once filled the news had faded into the background, replaced by a quiet efficiency that made the trade nearly invisible. Nightclubs in Berlin, warehouses in Antwerp, and private villas along the Adriatic all became part of the same web, each connected, each benefiting from a product that never stopped moving. The war between the Kavač and Škaljari clans had ended in exhaustion, but their legacy remained, buried deep within the systems they built. For investigators, the challenge was no longer catching smugglers at sea, it was following invisible money through offshore accounts and crypto wallets. The cocaine itself was only part of the empire. The real power lay in financial networks that stretched across continents. In this new era, criminals didn't just move drugs, They moved wealth, influence, and silence. The Western Balkans had become more than a smuggling corridor. It was now the financial artery of Europe's hidden cocaine economy. In the end, the empire survived not because of its violence, but because of its ability to disappear. The faces changed, the methods evolved, and the routes shifted. But the trade endured, quiet and relentless. On the surface, the Adriatic coast still sparkled with beauty, tourists sipping coffee by the sea, fishermen mending their nets, children playing by the shore. Yet beneath that calm, the same undercurrent pulsed through the region, invisible but powerful. The cocaine empire of the Western Balkans had learned to live in the shadows, and in those shadows it continued to thrive, unseen, unbroken, and eternal.